Easy to say, easy to do, but it's not easy, well maybe for you.
A hopeless romantic all my life, surrounded by couples all the time. Wish we never met, 'cause you're too hard to forget.
So, okay, so what's going on here? Are they all copying the same melody? It might just be a coincidence.
I've always been told one day I'll find somebody who changes my mind.
All right, I get the point, but you know, it's only pop music. It's not even like real music. Okay, but you know, they're all in English. All those songs, they're all in English. Okay, that's weird, but you know, it's only.
And they floated in on the jasmine wind, Kulthum and Omar Sharif.
I've named this melody the Gen Alpha melody, referring to the time period most of these songs were released. But why is this interesting? The world of music is built upon inspiration and melodic and harmonic norms, so being inspired is inevitable. This is seen throughout history in chord progressions such as the 1/4/5s of blues or the 2/5/1s of jazz, or the axis of awesome progression in pop music. It's also seen in different production techniques such as the use of sampling, jazz and soul in hip-hop, or the heavy use of chorus in the 80s. This is why we call things cliches, because our ideas inspire each other. But the Gen Alpha melody is different, and that's because it's a fully fledged melody being copied. This means it's a very specific melody, and a melody that could have easily been a victim of copyright. What makes this so interesting is that I've never seen a specific melody come even close to being as used in popular music. The only ones I can think of are melody writing techniques such as one-note melodies like the supertonic melody, which Huang made a video on, or like the triplet flow of trap music. But the Gen Alpha melody is a bit too specific. A hypothetical comparison would be if the riff or the melody to Seven Nation Army was copied 100 times and no royalties were being paid to the White Stripes. But what makes this melody so specific? Here's how it works. Alright, so the melody is made up of 4 notes split into 2 phrases. It starts on the 4th degree and is then followed by the note a tritone below, which is the 7th. Next up is the second phrase, which begins on the 3rd, and then jumps down a 5th to the 6th degree. If that didn't make sense, I was just naming the different degrees of the major scale as opposed to just the names of the keys, because the melody isn't always in C major, and the notes are therefore not always F, B, E, A. Make sense? Great. Also, not all melodies including that specific series of tones are the Gen Alpha melody. For example, last year I tried going viral by jumping on the trend with this composition, but it didn't really work out. What constitutes the Gen Alpha melody is therefore that these 4 notes are the pillars of the melody, which means all other tones revolve around these because they're landing on strong beats or the melodic phrase ends on them. The reason reason I think this is such a widely copied melody is because it's a prime example of a good melody. And good melody is obviously subjective when talking music, but at least in traditional terms. Melodies in classical music are built up by questions and answers. It might seem a bit weird to call a melody a question, but I never really asked for your opinion, did I? Another way to phrase it is as dissonance and consonance, which is basically what all music is built up on. You can hear the first phrase is setting up to something, but you can't really just end a phrase there. And to that question we get an answer, but it's sort of inconclusive. It's not really, the answer you wanted. So it's followed by another question. And then you finally get the answer you wanted. It feels consonant, or it's a nice feeling ending on this tone. There are obviously some small deviations with the different examples, but all the melodies all share this characteristic framework, those 4 pillars. In conclusion, it's a great sounding melody by itself and has this bittersweet quality, which also makes sense given that heartbreak or melancholia is one of the most common lyrical themes in all of music. Like nearly all of the uses of Gen Alpha melody have lyrics that are about heartbreak or melancholia in some shape or form. All the examples I've shown follow this formula with the 4 pillars, but there are hundreds more examples out there. Here are a few more. When finding these examples, I stumbled upon hundreds of examples of songs that sounded alike from different users on YouTube, Reddit, or TikTok. And some come close, but not quite to being the exact melody. And that's because they only contained at least 2 of the aforementioned pillars of the Gen Alpha melody. For example, I've seen Lady Gaga mentioned several times on posts on this subject. You probably recognize this melody. The difference here is that the last pillar ends on the 3rd instead of the 6th, which means it only has 3 pillars instead of 4. Here's some other examples of outliers of the Gen Alpha. Most of these definitely have the same vibe and sort of the same structure, but I wouldn't categorize them as using the Gen Alpha melody. It's just sort of the same vibe. There are many examples of this, but here are a few more. Alright, so I want to make it very clear that this is in no way an attempt to bash any of these artists or to claim lack of originality of any of these songs. All of them have these different features that make them original other than the melody, whether that being the harmony, lyrics, groove, or production. But again, this doesn't really seem like a coincidence, so it still begs the question. Lawsuits in music are always a popular topic because nobody wants to see anybody take credit for somebody else's work. And on the flip side, nobody wants to see somebody get wrongly accused of stealing when they aren't. In broad terms, the way it works is that if you make a song with a melody from another song or very similar to another song and get sued, a court decides whether or not you have to give songwriting credit to the original songwriters, which is a cut that varies. The metrics which the verdict is based upon can, for example, be the aforementioned pillars of the Gen Alpha melody. Some popular examples of songs that had to pay the original songwriters for copying include Stay With Me by Sam Smith and I Won't Back Down by John Petty, Creep by Radiohead, and The Air That I Breathe by The Hollies, My Sweet Lord by George Harrison, and He's So Fine by the Chiffons. But even though Radiohead, Sam Smith, and George Harrison had to give songwriting credits to the original songwriters, I don't think those examples come anywhere near to being as similar as the hundreds of uses of the Gen Alpha melody. And that's because the Gen Alpha melody is a case of what's called interpolation. An interpolation involves taking part of an existing musical work as opposed to a sound recording and incorporating it into a new work. This means it's not sampling, but rather a copy of the melody. Some artists do this consciously, like Ride Round by Flowrider, being an interpolation of You Spin Me Round by Dead or Alive, or Seven Rings by Ariana Grande, being an interpolation of My Favorite Things from Sound of Music. This is what a lot of EDM artists do, because they know the popularity and recognition of the melody will make it easily digestible, which is great solely from a financial standpoint, because it'll get more streams, and the cut you have to give to the songwriters is made up for by the recognition, and therefore more streams than if it had another melody. Some also do this subconsciously, meaning they probably weren't aware that they were stealing. Artists like Ed Sheeran and Oasis have been accused of this several times. Either way, they have to pay a huge cut to the original songwriters if the songs are not in the public domain. A counter-argument to plagiarism in music is that there are only 7 notes to choose from. But that argument falls short because there are endless possibilities when it comes to even the major scale and a 4-bar phrase. Look up pandiatonicism, for example. In pop music, what happens is that once you're confined to having it sound easily listenable, it narrows the options down significantly, since common chord progressions and pop formulas are the norm. This is why I don't think most of the songwriters of songs with the Gen Alpha melody made a conscious decision to steal or interpolate, but rather just fiddled around with the melody to a very common chord progression and subconsciously heard what sounds good from their past listening experiences. Okay, so everybody's copying everybody, and they are basically doing an interpolation of this melody. That's fine. But who made the melody? Who gets the money? Clairo is a name that pops up a lot because Sophia was such a big hit, and most of the examples of the Gen Alpha melody come from 2020 and onwards. She's also a very respected artist, so nobody really sees her as unoriginal. But she didn't write the melody, because I can find several other examples from before 2019 with the exact same melody. All the cases from the 2010s lead back to Lady Gaga, which I mentioned used a variation of the Gen Alpha melody. But this is still not the bottom of this rabbit hole, because through this extensive research, all clues lead back to one person and a song released in 2004, which is the oldest use of this melody I could find. Oh, and just on an ending note, there's this obscure Scouse band who used it, but they probably didn't influence anybody.